Welcome to the inaugural episode of Breaking Ground. I'm Steve Kliegerman, president of Brown Harris Stevens Development Marketing. During our monthly podcast, we're going to discuss the residential housing market in New York City and the boroughs from the perspective of developers, landlords, financiers, investment sales experts, as well as buyers and sellers. Our goal is to provide you with an insider view of the New York development process, including the challenges and process that lead to creating more housing in an urban environment. Today we have with us Bob Knakal, guru of the investment sales market in New York. Bob is Senior Managing Director and Head of New York Private Capital Group at JLL. With a resume too long to quote, Bob has been involved in over 8,000 transactions totaling over $40 billion in sales during his 40-year career. He's also one of the smartest people I've ever met. We'll be talking with Bob shortly. We also have joining us today Daniel Seigle, Chief Architecture and Design Officer for Brown Harris Stevens Development Marketing. Dan has worked with some of the nation's most notable architectural firms, including Robert Stern, Studio Sofield, and March & White, informing developers on all aspects of the development and architectural process. Bob, Dan, thanks for joining me on my first official podcast. I'm so excited. My mother's going to be really excited. So we're here today to talk about residential real estate, and our topic today, as I told you guys, is office-to-resi conversions, but also just opportunities in development in general. So, Bob, 2 months ago, you invited Robin Schneiderman and I to your Knakal Mac room. That's even hard to say. Knakal Mac room. So we walked into that room and were completely blown away by what you have created to analyze the opportunities in residential conversions from commercial buildings. Can you tell me, how did you come up with this concept? How long did it take you to create that room? And so far, what have the results been?
Sure. Well, Steve, first of all, thanks for having me on the inaugural show. I couldn't be happier to be with you. We've been friends for so long, and this is really great. I wish you the best of luck with the series.
Appreciate that.
So the Knakal Map Room started out of a frustration of not being able to really understand what the development pipeline was like for rental apartments, condos, hotel, office, and a miscellaneous basket of other types of properties. And about 10 years ago, I said, you know what, I want to go out and count every building under construction in the market, but who the heck has time to do that? Pandemic hits, I get out of town, I come back in to pick some stuff up, and I'm driving on the east side, and it's like a ghost town. It was like a science fiction movie. Every store was closed, no cars on the street, no people walking around, and it occurred to me, you know what, this would be a perfect time to go count buildings. So I had my team make up copies of the Sanborn tax lot map. Every week, I would come into the city with one of my guys. We'd park the car somewhere, get out, walk around for a half hour, move 10 blocks, get out, walk around for a half hour. We had highlighters. We colored in everything, buildings under construction, sites that were demoed, potential sites. When we were done 4 months later and 220 hours in the field later,
oh my God.
we taped all the pieces of the map together. Since we finished that, which was in September of 2020, we've been tracking every demo permit, building permit, foundation permit the city's issued. And today, we have an extraordinarily accurate pipeline of every single property that is under construction, either in planning, the planning phase, and so it helps us with our valuations when we're looking at a potential piece of land to sell and to value, because we know what the supply pipeline is looking like for that particular sector. So 3 years in the making, and a lot of work, but the quality of information that's in there is extraordinary with regard to not only the pipeline, but also concurrently a 3-year project was coming up with what we're going to call the Knakal Land Index, which will disaggregate land values into those 5 buckets: rental, condo, hotel, office, and then miscellaneous for education, healthcare, retail, et cetera. And we have that data going all the way back to 1984.
That's incredible. I mean, being able to visualize that, and when we walked into that room, I mean, literally the entire room is a map. And you can literally see every block and lot. And you know, it's really funny. After I walked out of the room, and I never told you this, my first responsibility in real estate when I was 18 years old was in my father's real estate office on Union Square. And my job was to map 34th Street to the Battery, every residential building in the city. We did it in binders. So I did the exact same thing. I copied every page of the Sanborn Land Book. I highlighted every residential co-op, condo, and rental so that we can canvas them. But you've taken this to a completely different level. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, Steve, it's essentially the same thing, just in a different format. And we do have binders, 3-ring binders that have information on every few square blocks. And it's, this, people say, Bob, how did you come up with this idea that's so new, cutting edge? And I showed them a picture of me sitting at my desk at 18 East 41st Street in 1991, and I have maps on the wall right behind me. It's the same exact thing. So it's just something that now the quality and level of information that we have on the map is very different than we had back in the early 90s. But it's been a fantastic thing business-wise.
That's amazing. Have you seen the results financially? In other words, are you finding the deals there now because of what you're able to see? Have you made deals?
Sure. Well, historically, my winning percentage on pitches has been 26% over the last 40 years. And as of last week, I closed deal number 2,319.
Wow! Congratulations.
But in the map room, I'm 9 for 9 so far.
That's amazing.
So it's really having a great impact on clients. Look, it's very clear because of a lot of hard work and a lot of research and a lot of hours put in. It's clear if you want to know something about the land and development market in New York City, it's in that room.
That's amazing. Daniel, so we've been looking at a lot of these opportunities of commercial to resi conversions. Tell us a little bit about what you look for when we're walking a building. What are you looking for that makes a good opportunity for a commercial to resi conversion from an architectural standpoint? We're going to talk to Bob in a few minutes about the financial side of it, which is a lot more complicated.
Yeah, sure. So typically we're looking at buildings, more often than not, they're on corners. Just naturally, the more windows a building has per the floor plate dimension, the better a candidate it's going to be. And I think from there, it's really the basics: floor plate dimension, where are the elevators, where are the fire stairs, and do they work for residential? There's code considerations that we need to think about. A big one being a 30-foot requirement. Every kitchen and habitable space in an apartment in New York City typically needs to be within that 30 feet. So we're really taking that information and trying to map it across a building, but also looking at it a little bit more in depth. So it's not just, for example, on the windows, it's not just how many windows are there. It's really more about the pattern of the fenestration. And, do we have a nice mix of window and wall?
So that you can create rooms, so you can create division between the mullions and the walls.
Right. I mean, interestingly, like some buildings that we see we think are really beautiful and would feel natural as candidates for conversion. And then when you get in and you start to lay them out, in some cases, sometimes the windows are too big, or the spacing between the windows is too large, or the sill heights don't work. And so that's another reason why, we walk every building and really kind of evaluate it from the inside out too.
Right. And when you mentioned the 30-foot rule, you're talking about 30 feet from a window, 30
Correct.
feet from ventilation. Right.
Yeah, and we can get creative with the depth beyond 30 feet. So there's home offices, there's opportunities to create additional storage for units. We can do more in the way of closet space and bathrooms, because those can be further from the window. So there is an opportunity to create actually really amazing units, but they are typically a little bit different from what you would see in a ground-up project.
Right. Thank you. And Bob, going back to the deal side of this, right? So sure, you're talking to almost every Class B office owner in the city right now. What makes a good opportunity for that Class B office owner to convert versus ones where you see them potentially having to literally hand the keys back to a bank?
Well, as Daniel said, physical characteristics are one. Does the building lay out relatively well for conversion? Other factors that come into consideration, Steve, really are what does the capital stack look like in the building? What's the cost to convert going to be? What's the tenancy look like? I have to say that today, relocating office tenants is probably easier than it's ever been in history. Since the first office building was ever built, it's probably easier today than going back to then, because there is so much space available, and probably the tenants that are in place are probably paying more than they would have to pay in alternative space. Okay. So it's easy, but for every owner, it's a different calculus in terms of, what's going to make sense, what they should do. Are they so far underwater that they're just throwing the towel in? And one of the interesting things, listening to Daniel mention the characteristics he's taken into consideration, it's complicated to do these things. And I know you guys are so great at figuring out what's feasible, what's not feasible. But I think what we're seeing is the value of these B and C office buildings come down to the point where even if you layer on top of those costs, the cost to demolish the building, I think a lot of these are land sales. They're not really conversion opportunities. And I think at the end of this cycle, I think we're going to look back and see that there were as many, if not more, buildings demolished than converted during this period.
That's really interesting. That's super interesting. I mean, it sounds like a boom for the construction industry if we can get this all off the ground.
It should be. I mean, hopefully our politicians will see that because of policy, they have basically stopped construction of residential rentals. There's no tax abatement
no
in place
421A.
today.
Mm-hmm.
So they're creating an air bubble in the pipeline. That is really bad. I mean, in fact, every piece of legislation that's either been enacted or ignored since 2018 has done nothing but constricted supply and exerted upward pressure on rents. So, we need to get the market moving. That's one way to have it happen. I think we will see a lot of new construction.
Yeah, I agree. Dan, coming back to you. So, you talked about analyzing the building. Once you've analyzed the building, you've walked the building, what are your next steps? What do you do for developers or potential developers or landlords that are looking to convert? What's your process in supplying them with the information that they need and we all need to make good decisions?
Sure. Yeah. It tends to be a little bit of it's two-sided in the sense that technologically we use, for example, we use an app called Property Scout that couples together every bit of information that we would need to know about a building into one place, and that's very helpful to look at things very quickly on the front end. But then it gets very low tech from there. We're printing the floor plans. We're sitting around a table together, you, me, and Robin, talking about what is a unit mix that's going to work for this location and for this floor plate, and we generally scribble, and it's a messy process.
It is a messy process.
But I come away from the table with enough information to then go back to my desk and do my thing. And really what we do is all by hand, because it's the quickest way to do it, but we do full unit layouts using everything that we know and that we utilize for ground up projects. So all the rules that we ascribe to a ground up project, we apply to our studies of office to residential. And so we can be confident coming out of that process that not only do units fit, but they're good units, and they will sell.
Right. Yeah. And then from there we can create an approximate either rent or selling price that would ascribe to those units so that we can do the financials, Bob, to see if it really works, if it works as a knockdown, if it works as a conversion, what the right recipe is. Or, unfortunately, every once in a while we do have to tell someone, we don't see it working and you might just be better off handing the keys back, which has unfortunately happened a couple of times in the last couple of months. Bob, I know it's not a conversion situation, but the other day we were talking about something else that came out of your analysis as you were, working in your map room, and something that you noticed as far as undevelopable property in the city. I think it'd be really interesting for our listeners to hear a little bit about that.
Right. Well, the underdeveloped property, I guess, is a better way of saying it. A couple of things really stood out to me because part of creating the map was walking every street of Manhattan south of 96th and 110. And the two things that stuck out were that there were several streets in Manhattan that I had never even heard of before. Weehawken Avenue and Jersey Street and Doyers Avenue. So that was one thing. The other thing was it's amazing the massive amount of land that the city owns on which public housing sits. Massive parcels of land that are housing maybe 10 or 5% of the number of people that could be living on that land. Generally, NYCHA housing is not in the best shape in the world, and I think there's an opportunity to do a lot of really interesting, creative things that will help the city in a number of ways. You could build new buildings on those parcels, move people 100 feet, 150 feet into brand new housing, not displace anyone, get some of that dozens and dozens of acres that the city owns, waterfront property that could get back on the tax rolls. You could do a series of leases to get an annuity coming in, retain ownership of some of it. But if you have a giant parcel and there are 1,000 people living there could be 10 or 15,000 people living on that particular piece of land. And I think it's a vitally important asset. City needs housing. It's great to see that Related, in essence, is doing the job over in Chelsea.
Chelsea
to
houses.
effectively redo that, but I think that should be done all over the city.
Yeah, agreed. Have you had any conversations with the mayor's office or city planning about this? Because obviously, your opinion carries a lot of weight. So, what's been the reaction?
Yeah, well, I try to bend the ears of politicians whenever I can, because I think a lot of the policy that we have is actually creating speed bumps on the way to our recovery. We need the supply side is the solution to all of our housing problems. And anytime I have a chance to speak to a politician, I tell them that. And there are so many things that could be done to increase the supply of housing. And that's such a great thing because it will exert downward pressure on rents, make it more affordable for everybody, create jobs, create more tax revenue. There's no bad that comes out of that other than you have potentially a bunch of new people moving into a district that may not know the local politician and may not vote for that local politician, and that's where the rubber has to meet the road and is not.
From what I've been told, that's why Staten Island never got developed, because they never wanted outsiders moving in because they may vote differently.
Well, look, I think we need to figure out a system to use the tremendous assets that we have. I think New York is the greatest city in the world. I think that policymakers are actually hurting the growth of the city, and the city could be so much better than it is with the right policies being implemented. But there are relatively easy ways to make this happen. It's just not happening. And I think the biggest issue that we have, Steve, in New York is voter apathy. We have only about 15% of our registered voters actually vote. And I think if people became more aware of that and understood, if you were a free market tenant in New York living here and you think your rent's too high, it's your local politician's fault.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because when Stuytown was sold, I thought that play was for the land that's undeveloped. I really didn't think it was just for the housing that's there. So you would have thought that they would have look to redevelop that land, and as you said, a lot of the NYCHA housing is in disrepair. When I was up in Toronto for ULI back in April, we visited a similar type of affordable housing development that had been completely knocked down and redeveloped, and every single tenant that was in that development was brought back. So they were relocated, brought back, and they were wildly happy. They have cogen plans, sustainability. They have brand new apartments that really fit their needs. It's definitely something that we have to focus on going forward, because we're only going to grow, right? If the city doesn't grow, it will die. So the city has to grow, and you have to house more people.
Well, Steve, under the plan that I laid out, you don't have to relocate people. You just ask them to move to the new building.
Right, you build it, and then...
If you look at the lot coverage of public housing, I would say it's somewhere between 10 and 15%, where the lot coverage in private sector housing is 70 or 80%.
Right.
So you have the ability to build new buildings without displacing anybody. You just simply say, hey, pack up and just move 100 feet down the street, and you're in a brand new place.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you can take down the old building that has well outlived its useful life and build a new building, right? So then, you're creating all new housing that's a lot more sustainable, that really meets the needs of today's New Yorker. I like it.
Without a doubt.
I like it a lot. So Dan, talking about that, looking at zoning, looking at all this undeveloped land, have you, in your career, taken a look at these kind of things? Have you thought about these challenges and how maybe, what would the new housing look like? Would it be built differently? Would it be built with different materials? I know this is a question we haven't really talked about before, but what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's interesting, we talk about sustainability, and I think it's actually a nice tie back really to the office-to-resi conversation, because those projects are inherently sustainable in a very different way, maybe not as big a scale. And I've always been interested in this idea of sustainability in any new project in the city. And I think it's something that is very true of the office-to-resi projects, but we're not really talking about it. It's, our sustainability conversations are happening really around new construction, and not so much attention is really on, the value of reusing an existing building. And I think the value extends beyond, pure sustainability. I think certainly with what we do, we've got a stock of really great buildings in the city that have a lot of character that people would want to live in, and they have details that we yearn for in new construction.
Right.
And it's a very funny thing. We're working on projects that have traditional ground-up projects that have traditional detailing, and here you have a stock in the city that exists that have all of that already there, and it's just a matter of, it's a real opportunity. Work with what's there and play off it with the future design of the building. And I think it's a win-win really for everybody. And you're creating housing that I think people are going to be really drawn to.
Absolutely. And as Bob mentioned, a lot of this property is waterfront property. I mean, amazing views, beautiful. Even if you built 50% or 40% of that available land, you'd still have a lot of green spaces. You'd still have a lot of park space. You'd still have, a lot of livable area that everyone can enjoy, right? So it makes a lot of sense. So Bob, you've been talking to all these Class B, mostly, I would assume, office owners. Is there a common theme you're seeing with them? Is there a common conversation that happens? Which opportunities do you run after and pursue versus you kind of say, I think I'll take a pass on this one?
Well, Steve, the first thing we do, anytime an owner calls us and says, hey, I'm maybe interested in selling, we need a valuation on our property, first thing we do is look up the debt amount.
Right.
And figure out whether it's even worth pursuing the opportunity or not. After that, I think buildings fall into different categories. The ones that are probably the most troubled are the buildings that have been owned very, very long term. And if you think about just to go to 40,000 feet and look at that marketplace, the average turnover rate of the total stock of buildings in Manhattan over the last 40 years has been 2.6% of the stock annually. If you look at that, what that tells you is that, number one, there's never a ton of buildings for sale. Number two, when someone buys a building in Manhattan, on average, they own it for 40 years. So half the buildings have been owned for more than 40 years. So you look at a building that was bought 70 or 80 years ago by 2 or 3 guys that got together. Today, there are 37 people that were getting checks from that building, most of which are passive. The checks have been getting smaller and smaller, and the building,
they might have to go to work.
The building's not competitive. So how do you make that building competitive in the market? Well, you have to put in a new lobby, a new hallways, a new elevator cabs, elevator mechanicals, bathrooms, HVAC, windows, roof. Write a check instead of collecting a check. Those people will have a heart attack.
Right.
So these are effectively zombie buildings. The cost basis is zero. The taxes, if they sold, would be tremendous. Nobody of those 37 people that were getting checks wants to write a check so the building can be improved and be competitive. That building's stuck. So a lot of those owners are going to have to figure out, hey, we may have to sell a piece of the equity to get the money to renovate the building, make it competitive. Or is it worth even trying to save the building as an office building? But each of the circumstances for each owner are very different. And you have to look at the debt amount, look at what the ownership structure is, look at what's feasible and what's not. And like you said, sometimes the option, just hand the keys back. Sometimes it's convert the building. Sometimes it's knock the building down. Sometimes it's just sell the building, pay the taxes. But fortunately, the diminution in value is leaving, for those folks who conservatively levered their buildings, there's still a little bit of an equity cushion that they can get out with a few bucks.
Yeah.
But the circumstances are different for everybody.
Yep. So the word of the day is stay away from zombie buildings, though.
Well, but that's where the opportunity is.
Well, no, stay away from the family, but maybe the opportunity is there if you can make something happen with them. Do any of these families, would they JV? You think they would partner with
JV,
somebody?
Or we've talked to a number of them about doing 99-year ground leases with people, so they could still maintain some kind of
income stream
coming in regularly, but provide somebody in the driver's seat that's willing to put the capital in to make that building competitive.
Yeah. Well, Bob, thank you very much. You're a wealth of knowledge. I cannot thank you enough for taking time out of your incredibly busy day, for you and for Daniel, of course. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to having you back in a couple of months to see how things are going.
Great to be here.
Thanks a lot, buddy. I appreciate it.